Throughout history, great thinkers, philosophers, spiritual philosophers, mystics, theologians, mystical movements and spiritual movements that offered profound gifts to their time for the evolution of consciousness and the advancement of those societies came under the condemnation and scrutiny of the prevailing powers of their time, whether those were governmental or ecclesiastical. If we go back to ancient Greece, to Socrates, he came under the condemnation of the state for teaching people how to think and to plumb the depths of human consciousness, to think profound thoughts about life. That was seen as a corruption of the youth and led to the state murdering him. And then when we go to the early Christian church, to the Gnostic fathers, they in their spiritual mysticism and their investigations into what it meant to be human, believed that at the very core of human identity was a divine light, a divine spark, and that divine light was our deep connection to God, or the mystery of higher consciousness, however you might describe it. That brought them under the scrutiny of the early church fathers, and their work was condemned. Their ideas continued to live, but their work at that time came to an end. And then when we move into the medieval period and we come to Meister Eckhart, who was a Dominican friar, he was a mystic, a theologian and a philosopher. And he too, like the early church Gnostic fathers, found that at the core of human identity was what he called uncreated light, that we had that spark of divinity within us, which was our direct access to the mystery of God, or higher consciousness. And that brought him under the scrutiny of the Inquisition, and the Inquisition investigated his work. He died before his work was the investigation was finished. But we know back then that when the Inquisition had noticed you, that could lead to censure, condemnation, torture, or even death. And then when we move into the 20th century, and we look at the ideas of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. He was a scientist, a paleontologist, and a mystic, a philosopher, priest, and theologian. He had been exposed to the horrors of the First World War as a stretcher bearer, bringing in the young soldiers who had been maimed and who died on the battlefield. He'd also, as a scientist and a paleontologist, had looked at human nature, the world, and the cosmos, and had found that there was a connection between what was then evolutionary theory, mysticism, human consciousness, and divinity. And he proposed this idea that human consciousness was evolving towards a greater outcome, and did so within the confines of Christian theology as well at the time. He too came under condemnation by the Holy Office. He was censured, his works were condemned, and he was silenced. He was never allowed to teach at a university again. And then if we move outside of the confines maybe of ecclesiastical authority into the other areas of the 20th and 21st century, so let's think about Carl Jung. He was from the school of, he was a psychiatrist, a Swiss psychiatrist from the school of psychoanalytic psychotherapy or psychiatry. And because he took his ideas outside of conventional psychoanalytic theory into mysticism, into collective consciousness and archetypal psychology, he too came under severe scrutiny by his peers, who thought that his ideas were very unorthodox and dangerous. And then, last but not least, let's think about the work of Professor John Mack, who was the lead for psychiatry at Harvard University. He was the head of department, and he started to investigate the experiences of people who were deemed to be abductees of the UFO phenomenon. When he started his work, he had no belief in anything supernatural or spiritual, and he thought that he was going to find a psychopathological or a link to some kind of psychological phenomenon that caused what we would call the abduction experience. And as he listened to hundreds of people who had had these experiences, he changed his mind. He came to find that there were profound transpersonal, physical, mystical, and also traumatic experiences in these encounters with what were considered to be non-human intelligences. This brought about an investigation by the powers that be in Harvard University, and they sought to take away his tenure and to condemn his work and to finish his career. Luckily, they weren't successful, but he went through a terrible time trying to defend his reputation. And his work led to some of the greatest understandings that we have about the UAP phenomenon and what happens to people that have the experience of being physically or mystically, at least anyway, taken into some kind of non-human realm. That work and the works of so many others have broken the frontiers of conventional science and conventional theology and conventional thinking beyond those boundaries, not for the sake of controversy, but to advance human civilization and human understanding. And I think that these thinkers, if we want to go right back to Socrates, the early church Gnostic fathers, to the findings of Meister Eckhart and the other mystics, and then the work of Teilhard de Chardin and Carl Jung, and also John Mack, there's a seamlessness in what they've discovered, which is that human consciousness is not confined to some kind of cerebral reality or human system, that our consciousness is connected to a wider reality, to dimensions of reality that are beyond what is seen with the corporeal eyes, and that encounters within this mystery or within these powers or these non-human intelligences are actually guiding the evolution of humanity and the destiny of humanity in some way. And so when you break sort of the conventional sort of thinking into these realms, you are going to come under scrutiny and condemnation and, public ridicule. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, to actually step outside of conventional thinking and to put forward your ideas to try and help the society in which you're living. We're now living in the 21st century, and they're thinking, all of them, all of those historical movements and thoughts and thinkers and others, speak into the problems we're facing today. We're facing today three profound threats to the not just to our civilization, but to the eradication of our species on the planet. Those are unregulated AI, should Silicon Valley get its own way. The dangers and the real profound danger of ecological breakdown because of global warming and climate change, and the danger that the fossil fuel industry will win here and the advocates for global warming will lose. And then there's the danger of nuclear war that could annihilate the whole human species and all the life on the planet. And our governments are wanting to proliferate nuclear weapons. They speak of other nations as being a threat, and that these hostile nations pose a danger to our Western civilization. And rather than finding ways to dialogue and encounter and engage in a way that brings humanity together, they'd rather arm us up to the teeth with these nuclear weapons that could destroy us. So these are the dangers that we're facing. And these thinkers have got a lot to say to this. Thinking about John Mack and the UFO phenomenon, people don't realise very often that since 1945, or maybe earlier, since we started detonating nuclear weapons, first in the desert regions of the United States, but then dropping those bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that non-human intelligences, or UAP craft, have been making themselves more known to nuclear bases. So these craft have actually moved into military nuclear bases, which they've not been able to control or to stop. And they've actually switched off nuclear weapons, or in one case in Russia, they switched them on. And I think the message here very clearly was, these weapons are dangerous and destructive. And if we think then back to the experience of the aerial school phenomenon, where 60 school children saw what was deemed to be a UFO, and a number of those children that got close to where this craft landed saw non-human beings, traditional greys, you want to say that actually spoke telepathically to these children and showed them visions of the future, of the potential for ecological disaster and nuclear annihilation. And those children in 1994, who are now adults, continue to verify the truth of their experience. They too came under scrutiny and ridicule by conventional media that laughed at them and ignored what they had to say. And again, it was Professor John Mack who went to Zimbabwe to speak to these children, to listen to their experiences and to record them, so that we had access to information about what they experienced and verification of that. What we're seeing today in the world with AI, with nuclear weapons and ecological disaster, is a threat that we've never faced before. And there are mystical forces, non-human intelligences, and spiritual technologies that are speaking into our time. Think of it this way. If human consciousness, if we recognized that at the core of our being, that we all had uncreated light and divinity, that was a unifying field of energy between every human being on earth, that created a sense of oneness, or spiritual or conscious unity, we would never look at other people again in the same way. We wouldn't be looking at condemnation and attack and vilification. We wouldn't be seeing people who come on boats to other countries, seeking refuge and asylum because they're at risk of annihilation or destitution in their own country, as being enemies or as being a threat somehow. We wouldn't see people of different religions and different traditions to ourselves as being a threat. We would look upon each other as unified by our one divine nature, our one sense of unified consciousness. Something that I have found in my work and I've been a clinical social worker, psychotherapist, and a priest, spanning an area of 34 years. And what I've found, particularly in my palliative and end-of-life care work for the last 23 years, is that compassion as a form of a thought form, as a form of conscious evolution, is something that can change the structures of the human mind. And our capacity, our human capacity for compassion and empathy, which is actually built into our evolutionary biology, that capacity interfaces with our light and divinity within us. And from that, human consciousness has the potential to transform exponentially. We today need to be the John Macks and the Teilhard de Chardins and the Meister Eckharts and the medieval Cathars as well, and the Gnostics and the early Greek philosophers, particularly Socrates. We need to be the wisdom, the collective wisdom of all of those today. We don't have to be geniuses. We don't have to be clever. We have to be compassionate. And if we're compassionate, our human compassion is a gateway into a deeper mystical nature, into greater truths that can evolve our civilization in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. What I want to do in my work on YouTube and through social media is to talk into these great truths in depth. And I really want to invite you to join me in this journey. I have a YouTube channel, and I'd be really grateful if you'd come and like and subscribe to my channel, because if you do that, the work that I have to share can then reach a greater audience. The audience it needs to reach is all of us. We are all prophets, mystics, philosophers, and speakers of truth to our civilization. We can no longer depend on our governments or our academic institutions, or even our religious institutions to do this work. We do have allies, and believe it or not, the Roman Catholic Church, which was very active in the condemnation of Teilhard de Chardin and the work of Meister Eckhart and the early church Gnostics, has gone through its own evolution of consciousness, I believe, and is a great ally to humanity now. So since particularly the advent of Pope Francis and more lately Pope Leo, there's been a movement away from thinking about personal morality and sexual morality and saying no to everything, to thinking about social justice, compassion, our relationship with the planet Earth, our relationship with other human beings, realizing the dignity and the enormity of every human being on Earth and what we mean. It's speaking into that, and it's supporting now movements which in the past it might not ever have been aligned with. You know, Pope Leo very recently spoke very openly and I think condemnatorily of a certain political figure for his pursuance of war and violence and invasion of other nations. We have to find our allies now, and sometimes the movements and the institutions that may not have been allies in the past are allies now, and that takes discernment and wisdom. And so my channel is going to be open to all possibilities, to all allies, to all the profound thinkers, not in a disparate way, but in a unifying way, bringing that knowledge together so that we can draw from it and become the advocates today for humanity that are desperately needed. Please follow my work. Please introduce my work to other people. I'll be producing more work from today onwards that's going to speak into many of these issues. And I'm really relying on you to help with that. I don't want anything in return. I just want an open audience and dialogue. Thank you for listening to me today. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to you at some point in the near future. For now, wishing you deep divine blessings, much compassion and great joy in your life and the lives of all the people you love. Thank you.